I was just gonna ask some questions about you and your career and
Sure.
how you came to be in this position. I guess, did you imagine yourself growing up to be something like this, or did you have a different?
I had a different objective. When I was in graduate school at University of Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually went there for undergraduate, did my BA at Wisconsin, and then I went on for my master's in history there, and then I went on for my PhD at University of Toronto, and I was there from 1969 through let's say, I finished all my work except for my thesis by 1973.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1970, from 1973 to 1977, I actually taught full time at several universities, European history and American history and Canadian history. So I taught at a university called Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. I taught at York University just outside of Toronto in Downsview, Ontario. And then I taught at Laurentian University in northern Ontario. So I taught history, and I was trying to get a permanent appointment. I finished my by working full time. I kind of delayed the finishing of my thesis, so I didn't finish my thesis until 1977, and I got my degree in 1978. So I got my PhD in '78, and at that point I had an interview for a job for another teaching position in the New York City area.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided when I went down there that I would also at the same time see if I could get a job in publishing, that maybe I would get something more stable, because I had gone from university to university, basically taking one-year replacement appointments.
Mm-hmm.
If someone went away on leave, I would take their position and their classes. And, just like there is now, there's very few jobs for the number of PhDs that there were back in the 70s in history. So I interviewed for the job actually it was in New Jersey at Uppsala College, and at the same time I was interviewed for a job at, actually what happened was I knocked on doors, went around to maybe 10 publishing houses, and I got a favorable reception at most of them, but they said basically, come back when you have 6 months of experience. So my PhD would work for me. I would, obviously a PhD prepares you to read manuscripts and to write manuscripts,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of transferable skills to publishing. But what happened was when I went to talk to editors-in-chiefs of various publishing houses, they said, well, we'd love to hire you, but you need, to get some experience. If you had some experience, we'd hire you right now because you have all the other qualifications,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge of the field, knowledge of, what it takes to make a good manuscript, and so on. So then I remembered that somebody I'd met, I had done my research for my doctoral dissertation on French history, and I had met somebody in the libraries in France who I had become friendly with. And I remembered that he also had a hard time getting a job in teaching, and he was working for a publishing house. So I went to that publishing house to meet with him and to ask him how he got into publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, that the publishing house that he was working for, Prager Publishers, that's Praeger Publishers, and that company had hired a number of what we would call refugees from academia, people who had PhDs, who had taught, and were now looking to get a job in publishing. And this firm had hired a number of those people previously, and that he had been one of them. And he said to me, by the way, there just so happens to be a job open as assistant editor for business and economics. Maybe you should apply for it. So I did. Now my thesis was in history, but it was happened to be my thesis was a study of a business in France, a study of how this business owner created was one of the first to create a sort of social security system for his workers, and set up a model workers village next to the factory, so they had healthy living and daycare for kids and free schools for the workers and so on. And so so I knew a little bit about business and economics, and so what they did is they gave me a manuscript to review to see how well I would review it. And I still remember to today what the topic was on cost pass along inflation, which in the 70s was a very big thing because in the 1970s we had rampant inflation in the United States, and this was a very hot topic. And so I reviewed it using, I basically applied the skills I learned in graduate school, which is I looked up and see were there any other books on the topic, and I scanned the periodic literature to find out if this was an important topic, and I found it was an important topic, and not only important, but a hot topic, and very little was written on it. So I wrote up a review of it, and they looked at the review, and they offered me the job. And so I was also offered the teaching job that I had applied for. And so here was a crossroads in my career. And so I decided, since academic jobs or teaching jobs were getting harder and harder to find, that maybe I'll try my hand at publishing, and if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to teaching. And so I took the job as assistant editor for business and economics at Prager Publishers. And there I learned the sort of the basics of book budgeting, book editing, book design. I learned how to acquire books. How do you find good manuscripts? I basically learned the sort of the basics of book publishing there. And but I also got an abysmally low salary. I mean, because publishing is not a highly paid industry anyway. But I remember I had previous to that year, I worked as a assistant professor of European history at University of Western Ontario, and I was making $18,500. Okay, but I was offered $11,500 for this publishing job in New York City, which is more expensive than New York City. But I decided to take the job because I just thought, well, maybe this is an alternative career that might have more stability and more upward mobility than the teaching job. And so I took it, and I learned the job, and I decided I couldn't sort of live forever on $11,500. So what I did is I took the advice of all those people that I had interviewed with other editors-in-chiefs of other publishing houses who said, come back when you have 3 months experience. So when I was finally at this press for like 9 months, I decided, well, I'll just throw my resume, I'll apply for other jobs and see if I can get any interviews. And I got an interview from the State University of New York Press in Albany. And went to the interview, and it was sort of, in a way, for me, it was a good compromise because it put me back in academia, and I could also do the things I learned at the publishing house, the commercial publishing house in New York. So I get to combine publishing with academia, you know. And so I interviewed for the job, and 2 weeks later I was offered the position. And they offered the position to me at $19,000, which was already, you know, $8,000 more than I was making. But for me, it was the main attraction was that it offered me an avenue back into academia, into universities, where I think where I always wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And now I became the assistant editor. I became the senior acquisitions editor at the State University of New York Press. And at that time, that particular press was publishing about 18 books a year. And today, that same press is publishing over 200 books a year. So it was in a growth mode when I became the senior editor there.
Mm-hmm.
And actually the task that they set to me was to try to grow the press over the next 3 or 4 years. So while I was there, I actually helped the press grow from 18 to 45 books a year. And so what that meant is I needed to increase the number of manuscripts that were coming into the house to be considered for publication by acquiring lots of books, or lots of good books. And at the same time, I needed to obviously acquire books that could not only were important books,
mm-hmm.
but also books that could also sell and help sustain the publishing house. So what I did then is I simply applied the lessons that I learned in the commercial publishing house in New York on how to acquire books,
mm-hmm.
and how to acquire good books, and also how to budget for books. So I basically applied the lessons I learned, and what I did is the commercial publishing house had the way they acquired books was they set up special book series, like in particular topics.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, they had a series on multicultural corporations. And so what they usually had is they had a series editor, an important person in the field who would act as the editor for that book series. And that person would provide me as editor advice on which books are good and which books aren't, who are the best people in the field, who should review books.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did the same thing when I went to SUNY Press. I set up special